The Ocean Empress was a titan of the seas. A majestic vessel, it promised luxury and adventure. Tourists flocked to her decks, dreaming of sun-drenched days and starlit nights. Among them were Jack and Sarah Turner, a young couple celebrating 5 years of marriage with a lifetime yet to go. They boarded the ship with eager hearts. The Ocean Empress was everything they imagined. Opulent interiors shimmered under crystal chandeliers, gourmet meals served on fine china, and the air buzzed with laughter and the promise of escape. Jack and Sarah reveled in it all, toasting their love with champagne under a sky full of stars. Their cabin, a haven with a balcony overlooking the endless blue, offered breathtaking views. They spent their days exploring the ship, lounging by the pool, indulging in spa treatments, and dancing the night away. Each moment felt like a stolen dream, a perfect escape from reality. Little did they know, a shadow lurked beneath the surface. The Ocean Empress was not just a ship, she was a vessel of secrets. Whispers of a troubled past clung to her like barnacles, speaking of unexplained incidents and whispers carried on the wind. But these rumors were easily dismissed, swept away by the allure of luxury and the promise of adventure. Jack and Sarah, lost in their joy, remained oblivious. They saw only the shimmering surface, the attentive staff, the smiling passengers. The illusion held strong, weaving a tapestry of normalcy. But beneath the surface, the current was beginning to shift. A subtle tension crept into the air, a strange unease settled upon the crew. Their smiles seemed strained, their eyes haunted. The laughter in the corridors felt a little less carefree, a little more forced. The change was subtle, easy to miss for those caught up in the whirlwind of pleasure. But Jack noticed. He saw a flicker of fear in the eyes of a passing waiter, heard a hushed conversation in a language he didn't understand. A knot of worry began to form in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lay hidden beneath the opulent facade. The first sign was a whisper, a fleeting murmur carried on the ocean breeze. Jack heard it as he stood on the deck, gazing out at the vast expanse of water. It was a sound that sent a shiver down his spine, a low, guttural tone that seemed to emanate from the depths of the ship itself. He dismissed it as his imagination, the vastness of the ocean playing tricks on his mind. But the feeling lingered, a prickle of unease that refused to be ignored. He couldn't shake the sensation that he was being watched, that something unseen was observing his every move. Later that day, he found Sarah in the library. She was engrossed in a book, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Jack, Sarah," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "something feels off." Sarah, "Off? What do you mean?" "Jack, I don't know, it's just a feeling." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, tried to soothe his anxieties. "Sarah, it's probably just the change of scenery, darling, the sea air. We're just not used to all this relaxation." Jack wanted to believe her, he really did. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The second sign was more tangible. A series of small, unsettling incidents that began to chip away at the illusion of normalcy. A waiter dropped a tray of glasses, shattering them on the marble floor, his face pale, his eyes wide with a fear that seemed out of proportion to the accident. A lifeboat creaked ominously in the night, swinging back and forth as if pushed by an unseen hand, the sound eerie and unsettling in the stillness. A group of passengers gathered on deck, their faces etched with worry as they exchanged hushed whispers. Jack found himself drawn to these incidents like a moth to a flame, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. He began to notice things that others seemed to miss. A fleeting shadow in a darkened corridor, a cold spot in the middle of a crowded room. One evening, as Jack and Sarah strolled along the promenade deck, they came across a group of crew members gathered around an older woman. She was shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide with terror. As they drew closer, Jack overheard snippets of their conversation. Crew member, "Bad luck. Ancient curse. The sea demands a sacrifice." The words sent a chill down his spine, confirming his growing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. He exchanged a worried glance with Sarah, her face mirrored his own growing concern. The third sign was undeniable, a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a darkness that seemed to seep from the very walls of the ship. The laughter that had once filled the air grew muted, replaced by an undercurrent of tension and fear. The sky, once a brilliant blue, turned a brooding gray. Heavy clouds gathered on the horizon, threatening to unleash their fury upon the unsuspecting vessel. The wind picked up, whipping the sea into a frenzy. Waves crashed against the hull of the ship, the sound like the roar of some monstrous beast.
His voice grave, his words measured, he addressed the passengers. "The storm is nothing out of the ordinary." The Ocean Empress was built to withstand the worst the sea could throw at her.
But his words rang hollow. Even to Jack's untrained eye, the storm seemed different, more than just a meteorological event. It felt personal, as if the very elements were conspiring against them, as if the ship itself was drawing the darkness towards it. Sarah, sensing his growing unease, reached for his hand, her touch a small comfort in the face of the impending maelstrom. "It will be all right," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Jack wanted to believe her. He clung to her words like a lifeline, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were sailing into something far more terrifying than a storm. The storm hit with the fury of a vengeful god. Waves, towering and relentless, crashed over the deck. The Ocean Empress, once a symbol of luxury, was now a plaything of the raging sea. Passengers, gripped by terror, huddled in their cabins, their prayers drowned out by the howling wind. Jack and Sarah lay in their bed, the room plunged into darkness as the ship lurched violently. Furniture slid across the floor, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the hallway. Sarah clung to Jack, her body trembling. He held her tight, whispering reassurances he himself didn't believe. Hours crawled by, each one an eternity. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to intensify, fueled by a malevolent energy that chilled them to the bone. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something lurking just beyond the veil of the storm. Then, silence. The ship shuddered. The violent rocking subsided. But the silence was more terrifying than the storm. It was a heavy, oppressive silence that pressed down on them, smothering any hope they had clung to. Jack and Sarah exchanged a look, a silent question hanging between them. Was it over? Cautiously, they emerged from their cabin. The corridor was eerily deserted. Emergency lights flickered, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of salt water and a strange metallic tang that made their stomachs churn. They made their way towards the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they descended, they heard it, a low, murmuring sound coming from the lower decks. It was a chorus of whispers, too low to distinguish words but filled with an unmistakable sense of dread. They reached the lower decks and followed the sound. It led them to a narrow corridor lined with cabins. The whispers were louder here, more insistent. Jack felt a cold hand grip his heart as he realized the source of the sound. It was coming from inside the cabins. They approached the nearest cabin and pressed their ears against the cold metal door. The whispers intensified. A jumble of voices, some high-pitched and desperate, others low and guttural, all speaking at once. It was a cacophony of fear and madness that sent shivers down their spines. Section 3, the walls close in. Jack tried the door handle. It was unlocked. He hesitated, a sense of foreboding washing over him. Sarah, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, nodded for him to proceed. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The cabin was empty, the beds were neatly made, belongings were still packed in suitcases. But the whispers, oh, the whispers were even louder here, as if they were trapped within the very walls of the cabin. Jack and Sarah exchanged a look of utter bewilderment. Where were the voices coming from? They moved from cabin to cabin, each one empty, each one filled with the same unsettling whispers. It was as if the ship itself was whispering to them, mocking their fear, toying with their sanity. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in on them. Panic began to rise in Jack's chest. He had to get out of there. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her along. Their footsteps hurried and uneven. They ran through the labyrinthine corridors, the whispers chasing after them, growing louder with every step. They rounded a corner and collided with a solid wall of flesh. Jack cried out in alarm. He looked up and found himself face to face with a crew member, but something was terribly wrong. The man's eyes were vacant, his skin an unhealthy pallor. He opened his mouth and a voice that was not his own rasped, "Get out while you still can." Section 1, the unseen terror. The crewman lunged. His grip was like iron. Jack struggled, but the man was possessed by a strength he couldn't comprehend. Sarah screamed, her voice echoing through the empty corridor. The sound seemed to snap the man out of his trance for a moment. His eyes flickered with a flicker of recognition, then vanished again, replaced by a cold, dead stare. Jack threw his weight against the man, pushing him back. They stumbled, crashing against the wall. The impact loosened the man's grip, and Jack was able to break free. He grabbed Sarah's hand, and they ran. The whispers followed, urging them on, their voices filled with a mixture of malice and despair. They ran until they could run no more. Collapsing in a heap on the floor, their chests heaving, the whispers seemed to surround them, closing in like a suffocating blanket. Jack looked around frantically, searching for an escape, but the corridor seemed to stretch on endlessly in all directions. They were trapped. "We have to find someone," Sarah gasped, her voice thin and reedy. "Someone who can help us!" But deep down, Jack knew the truth. There was no one left to help them. They were alone on this cursed ship with whatever it was that had taken hold of the crew. Section 2. Clues in the Deep. Panic threatened to consume them, but Jack knew they couldn't give in. They had to think, to find a way out of this nightmare. He remembered the strange words he had overheard earlier. Ancient curse. The sea demands a sacrifice. Could there be some truth to the rumors? He decided to investigate. They couldn't just wander aimlessly. The ship held secrets, he was sure of it. Answers, perhaps, or at least a clue as to what they were up against. He remembered seeing a door marked crew only earlier. Maybe they could find something there, something that would shed light on the ship's dark history. Finding the door again was easier said than done. The ship seemed to twist and turn in on itself, the corridors leading them in circles. But finally, after what felt like hours, they found it. The door creaked ominously as Jack pushed it open, revealing a cramped, dusty cabin. A musty smell hung in the air. The cabin was lit by a single flickering oil lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. A table in the center of the room was covered in charts and navigational instruments, and there, tucked away in a corner, was a small wooden chest. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he lifted the lid. Section 3. The Cursed Legacy. Inside the chest, they found a collection of old logbooks and journals, their leather covers brittle with age. The handwriting within was spidery and faded, but legible. As Jack and Sarah began to read, a sense of dread settled over them. The words on the pages told a tale of greed, betrayal, and a darkness that stretched back generations. The Ocean Empress, it turned out, had not always been a luxury liner. She had begun her life as a slave ship, her hold filled with the cries of the damned. The captain, a cruel man driven by avarice, had made a pact with a powerful entity, trading the souls of his human cargo for favorable winds and untold riches. But the pact came at a terrible price. The entity demanded a blood sacrifice for its continued favor. And so, the captain began to offer up his own crew, one by one, to appease the dark forces he had unleashed. The ship became a floating tomb, its decks stained with the blood of the innocent. As Jack and Sarah delved deeper into the journals, they realized with growing horror that the entity had never left the ship. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, feeding off the fear and despair of those who dared to sail upon her cursed decks. The whispers, the strange occurrences, the possessed crew. It all made sense now. The Ocean Empress was not just haunted. She was a vessel of pure evil. Section 4. Facing the Shadow. A cold wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing the lamp and plunging them into darkness. The whispers seemed to press in on them, their voices filled with a triumphant glee. Jack and Sarah huddled together, their bodies trembling. They were trapped, not only on the ship, but with the knowledge of its terrible past. S1. As Sarah. "We have to break the curse," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "We have to find a way to stop it." Jack knew she was right. They couldn't just sit here and wait for the entity to claim them. They had to fight back. But how do you fight something that exists beyond the realm of the living? Suddenly, a faint light emanated from the logbook lying open on the table. As they watched in astonishment, words began to form on the page, glowing with an eerie luminescence. It was a message from the past, a desperate plea for redemption from one of the captain's victims. The message contained instructions for breaking the curse, a dangerous ritual that would require them to confront the entity head-on. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. With newfound determination, Jack and Sarah vowed to do whatever it took to lift the curse of the Ocean Empress, even if it meant facing the shadows themselves. Section 1. The Heart of Darkness. The logbook's message was clear. To break the curse, they had to confront the entity, face it in its lair. The heart of the ship, a hidden chamber, was its domain. The instructions were cryptic, a map drawn in blood, a chilling guide to their confrontation with the unknown. They followed the map, their steps hesitant, their breaths shallow. The ship seemed to resist their progress. Corridors twisted and turned, leading them in circles. The air grew heavy, thick with the stench of decay and the weight of centuries of suffering. Whispers followed their every move, taunting them, urging them forward. They passed closed doors, each one a potential portal to another horror. The ship groaned around them, a symphony of creaks and groans. It was as if the Ocean Empress herself was trying to warn them, to turn them back from their perilous path. Finally, they reached a dead end, a blank wall, cold and damp. Jack ran his hand over the surface, searching for a hidden lever, a secret passage. Nothing. He looked down at the map, his heart sinking. Had they come this far for nothing? Was this the end? Section 2. The ritual begins. Sarah gasped. She pointed to a small, almost imperceptible indentation in the wall. It was barely visible, but it was there. A keyhole, hidden in plain sight. Trembling, Jack reached into his pocket and retrieved an old, tarnished key he had found alongside the logbook. It had to be this. He inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a grinding sound, echoing through the silent passageway. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow doorway. A wave of stale, cold air hit them, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and something else, something ancient and evil. Taking a deep breath, Jack and Sarah stepped through the opening. The doorway closed behind them with a thud, plunging them into absolute darkness. They fumbled for a light, their hearts pounding in their chests. Finally, Sarah struck a match, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the walls of a small circular chamber. The air was thick with an oppressive energy. The walls were lined with shelves, stacked with strange artifacts, bones, skulls, and other unidentifiable objects. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, stained dark with what looked like dried blood. This was it, the heart of the darkness. Section 3. The Shadow Rises. Following the instructions in the logbook, Jack and Sarah began to lay out the items they had brought with them. A silver locket, a piece of white cloth, and a small silver knife. As they worked, the air grew colder, the shadows seeming to lengthen and twist around them. The whispers intensified, swirling around them like a vortex of fear. They finished arranging the items on the altar. The logbook instructed them to recite an incantation, an ancient prayer in a language neither of them understood. Jack cleared his throat, his voice trembling as he began to speak the strange words. As he did, the room began to vibrate, the artifacts on the shelves rattling ominously. A dark shape began to coalesce above the altar, growing larger and more distinct with every word Jack uttered. It swirled and pulsed, a mass of shadows with malevolent intelligence. The temperature plummeted, Sarah's breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The entity was awake. Its voice, when it spoke, was a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the depths of the ship itself. It spoke of betrayal, of broken promises, of the price of greed. It spoke of the souls it had consumed, the lives it had extinguished. It spoke of the vengeance it would unleash upon the world. Section 4. A Glimmer of Hope. Fear threatened to overwhelm them, but Jack and Sarah clung to each other, drawing strength from their love, their shared determination. They had come too far to give up now. This was their chance, their only chance, to right the wrongs of the past, to break the cycle of suffering that had plagued the Ocean Empress for so long. The entity lunged, its shadowy tendrils reaching for them, eager to silence them, to extinguish the flickering flame of hope they represented. But Jack was ready. With a swift, desperate movement, he grabbed the silver knife from the altar and plunged it into the heart of the swirling darkness. An ear-splitting shriek echoed through the chamber, a sound of pure rage and agony. The entity convulsed, its form flickering, its grip on the world weakening. The air crackled with energy, the artifacts on the shelves vibrating violently. The ship groaned, as if straining against some invisible force. The ritual was working, but would it be enough? Jack wanted to answer, to offer words of comfort and reassurance, but he couldn't find the voice. He simply nodded, clutching her hand tightly in his own, the feel of her warm flesh against his, a tangible reminder of the life they had so nearly lost. S1. Is it over? Silence falls. The shriek faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The air, thick moments before with malevolence, now felt strangely still. The shadows that had danced with such menace now retreated, shrinking back towards the altar. Jack stood frozen, the silver knife still clutched in his hand, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, the swirling mass of darkness above the altar began to dissipate. It dissolved into wisps of black smoke, rising towards the ceiling like lost souls finally granted release. The oppressive weight that had pressed down upon them lifted, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. The chamber, dimly lit by the flickering match in Sarah's hand, seemed to breathe once more. Sarah moved first, her hand reaching out to touch Jack's arm. The warmth of her touch broke the spell that held him. He turned towards her, his eyes searching hers for confirmation of what they both desperately hoped was true. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of their ragged breaths and the distant creaking of the ship. Scars remain. As they made their way back, retracing their steps through the bowels of the ship, they found the corridors no longer shifting, no longer menacing. The whispers were gone, replaced by a heavy silence that spoke more of exhaustion than malice. The Ocean Empress, battered and bruised by the storm and the confrontation with her own dark heart, seemed to sigh in relief. They emerged onto the main deck to find a scene of devastation. The storm, as if mirroring the internal struggle that had racked the ship, had finally abated. Dawn was breaking, casting a pale, watery light over the wreckage. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and debris littered the deck, a testament to the fury they had just survived. But amidst the destruction, Jack noticed something else. The remaining passengers, huddled together on the deck, their faces pale and drawn, were no longer gripped by the same mindless terror. The crew, though some still bore the marks of their possession, moved with a newfound purpose, tending to the injured, restoring order to the chaos. The entity might be gone, its hold on the Ocean Empress broken, but the events of the past few days had left an undeniable mark on them all. They had looked into the abyss, stared into the face of true evil, and emerged forever changed. There would be nightmares, of course, and scars both visible and invisible, but they had survived. Homeward bound. The journey back to port was a somber affair. The Ocean Empress, her once gleaming exterior now scarred and battered, limped towards land, her engines groaning in protest. The mood among the passengers and crew was a strange mix of relief, disbelief, and a lingering sense of unease. The sea, vast and unknowable, held many secrets, and they had been reminded of its power in the most terrifying way imaginable. News of the events aboard the Ocean Empress, though heavily censored, spread quickly. Rumors of a rogue wave, of a mutiny, of mass hysteria circulated through the media. But those who had been there, who had felt the cold touch of the entity, who had heard the whispers in the dark, knew the truth. They carried the secret in their eyes, in the way they flinched at the sound of the wind, in their newfound appreciation for the solidity of land beneath their feet. Jack and Sarah, hailed as heroes by some, avoided the spotlight. They returned to their lives, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of normalcy. The silver knife, cleansed and wrapped in the white cloth, lay hidden in a drawer, a constant reminder of the darkness they had faced and the love that had seen them through. Their anniversary trip, meant to be a celebration of their love, had become something else entirely. It had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and forced them to confront the fragility of life and the enduring power of hope. They had sailed into the heart of darkness and emerged, forever bound to each other, marked by the experience, but not broken by it. The Ocean's Secret. The Ocean Empress, after undergoing extensive repairs and a thorough cleansing, was eventually sold to another company. She set sail again, her dark past buried beneath fresh paint and new carpets, her name whispered with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Some said she was cursed, that the entity, though weakened, still clung to her decks, waiting for the chance to rise again. But the ocean, vast and ancient, held its secrets close. It had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars. The events aboard the Ocean Empress were but a ripple on its surface, a fleeting moment in its long and storied history. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the waves, one couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment, the right souls, to be revealed.